The Bengals' worst loss in franchise history had a very obvious culprit, but in this video, I'll explain the much larger problem that they have to tackle head-on going forward. Hi again, Bengals fans. John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here, and no, Zach Taylor is not getting fired this week. We all good there? I know that some of you may want to contest that, but I'm just keeping it real with you. If his team doesn't respond correctly after the worst, and I mean the very worst loss in franchise history, then we can start having that conversation for sure. And this is not even if Zach should be fired. It's all just about if he will be fired by the most conservative franchise in the history of sports. But again, that's a topic for another day. There are so many ways that we can go about covering the most embarrassing defeat in the 58-year history of the Bengals. And Taylor clearly wanted to emphasize that 5 turnovers, 3 of them happening in a 4-play span in the second quarter, was the main culprit for why the game ended up being a 38-point loss. But honestly, turnovers are fluky. It was fluky in the first couple of weeks where the Bengals relied on them to get to 2-0 in the very first place, and 5 turnovers in a single game probably isn't going to happen for the Bengals again this season. Fingers crossed. There's nothing more to say about it than just take care of the football. Don't make errant decisions. And again, just an assumption here, but if they do have another turnover-filled day, I'm going to assume that 2 of them aren't going to be returned for touchdowns by the same player. Turnovers are great when they're forced by your defense, and they can be an absolute killer when you give them to the opposing defense. But in terms of sustainability, even on a week-to-week basis, it just doesn't exist. What does matter in terms of week-to-week sustainability is the quality and the reliability of your run game. And the Bengals have a run game that's neither reliable nor quality in the slightest. And this, bar none, is the biggest problem with this team. There was a time in this game when Isaiah Rodgers, the cornerback for the Minnesota Vikings, who just had the greatest game any cornerback could have possibly dreamed of, he had more touchdowns as a cornerback than the Bengals had in terms of an average yards per carry running the football. Chase Brown had 10 carries for 3 yards. The only positive signs on that entire phase of offense were just a handful of carries from Samaje Perine. If your leading rusher at the end of a game has 21 yards on 4 carries, you have a terrible, terrible run game. And I know people are going to look at the stats. They're going to look at what I just said about Chase Brown having 0.3 yards per carry, and they're going to place blame on the running backs. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case here, because this offensive line cannot execute the most simplistic of run concepts, even if their hearts desire it. Every single starter along that offensive line, from Orlando Brown Jr., Dylan Fairchild, Ted Karras, Dalton Risner, and Amarius Mims, were blown off the ball in this game. It is their job to displace defensive linemen, and they were being displaced as offensive linemen. They were losing the point of attack. They were losing depth consistently. There were no holes to be found, no matter who had the ball in their hands. It was up to Samaje Perine, again, on just a handful of opportunities to make the most out of nothing. And for as good as the Vikings defense is, for as well as they are coached by defensive coordinator Brian Flores, run defense is not necessarily their strongest suit. But there isn't a scenario, there isn't a matchup in the NFL in which the Bengals have a more athletic offensive line than the opposing team's defensive line. And when you don't have athletes, when all you have is size, you hardly have any sense of power that's actually useful in terms of driving guys off the line. They have essentially zero functional athleticism along the offensive line, and that is a nightmare in the year 2025. And that's honestly why this is such a huge problem, because there's not a lot of schemes that can overcome this, because you already don't have the athleticism to just span wide zone and stretch out the defense horizontally. But if you also don't have the power to run up the middle, what can you do well? You can try to institute more counter plays, you can try to catch the defense off guard with draw plays, but man, it's not looking great. And when you have to support a quarterback that clearly can't just drop back 40 times and win you the game, there is no other part of this Bengals team that just needs to find something within themselves to just get better at what they need to do than the offensive line and running the football. There are no magical answers out here other than just executing better. And if that does happen, maybe you can see some form of a competent offense with Jake Browning at quarterback. But if not, I'm not expecting 38-point losses every single week, but I'm not expecting a lot of wins either.